what became more interesting to me and other labs was, why does this work? Isn't this weird? You have somebody write for a mere 15 minutes a day for 4 days, and their health improves. Their behaviors change. Their social behaviors change. We have done studies where we give them essentially a glorified tape recorder that comes on for 30 minutes and goes off for 30 seconds and goes off for 12 minutes. And we just capture their lives for several days at a time. They change. They're more socially engaged. They laugh more. Is there something about the writing? Can you look at the writing and see who's going to benefit versus who won't benefit? And that's what started to intrigue me. When we first started to look at this by just reading the essays. And I should tell you, when these kids were writing about traumatic experience, they wrote beautifully and powerfully. You would read these, and very often you'd cry. They were so powerful. So what we initially did was to get a bunch of these essays of people who wrote about traumas, and we selected out the essays for people whose health subsequently improved versus we compared those with people whose health did not improve. We called one group of essays Group X and the others Group Y. And we'd give these essays to clinical psychologists, to graduate students studying clinical, and we'd say, what is the difference between Group X and Y? Or we'd give them all these essays and just have them rate these essays along multiple dimensions. What we discovered was this method was a lousy method. First of all, it took forever for people to do it. Secondly, judges didn't agree. The way any two people would look at an emotional essay was like a Rorschach test. They looked at it in completely different ways. It was slow, expensive, but the worst thing was reading a lot of depressing essays depressed our judges. Which means if any of you feel you're too happy, send me an email. I'll send you thousands of these, and you'll get depressed because reading them over and over again is really quite strikingly miserable experience. So it was about this time, we're now in the early 90s, it occurred to me that the only way to go would be to come up with a computer program that could actually analyze these texts. And fortunately, I had a graduate student at the time, Martha Francis, whose undergraduate degree had been in computer science. And so she and I embarked on a project whereby we started to write a computer program, which we did. And the computer program was called Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, LIWC, which we pronounce Luke. And the Luke program the actual programming was actually pretty simple. What was not simple, though, was to tell the computer what to look for. Now, we started off the way that everybody does when they are doing computer science work or a program like this, and that is, we told the computer to look for emotion words. And you see this right now in online computational linguistics approach. It's called sentiment analysis. Everybody does this when they don't know what they're doing. I did it myself. So what we did was we had the computer look for positive emotion words and negative emotion words, and different types of negative emotion words like anger words and sadness and so forth. But to do that, you have to tell the computer what's an anger word. So what you do is you have to come up with lists of anger words. So we started off with the thesaurus and then questionnaires. And then we had students generate as many anger words as they could. In fact, that was another interesting experience with just doing that. We had generated a large number of anger words, and then one of the students in my lab, she found out her husband had been cheating on her. And she was involved in generating anger words. And this is true. One day, all of a sudden, here in the other room, everything goes silent, and all the students are standing by her. She is writing just one anger word after another. She was inspired. Now, what's interesting about this is we had all these these words, but then we would have judges have to agree on every word. Is this word, does it fit in this dictionary or another dictionary? And the judges had to agree. So we started off with emotion words, but then as long as we were doing that, we also wanted cognitive words. A cognitive word would be a word that suggests certain types of thinking. So one type of cognitive word would be causal words. These would be words like because, cause, effect, reason, rationale, where people are trying to detect the cause and effect of things. Another type of cognitive word that we looked at were words that we called insight words. These are words like understand, realize, know. And then as long as you're doing this is like eating potato chips. You might as well throw in some pronouns and articles and prepositions. You might as well throw in some death words. And, there's just so many things you can stick in. So before we knew it, we had a dictionary. We had 80 different dictionaries. In other words, the computer was looking for 80 different dimensions of words. So we first go back to our research on expressive writing and analyzed seven different studies that we and other labs had done with it to see if we could predict who would show benefits. And sure enough, we found some interesting things. We found some weak effects with emotion words, primarily positive emotion words. And that is, the more that a person uses positive emotion words when writing about something horrible, the better off they are. In other words, they benefit more. And positive emotion words would be words like happy, love, care. Even if the person says, I'm not happy, nobody loves me, I don't care about anything. That person, ironically, is better off than if they don't use those words. Someone who is not happy actually is thinking along the dimension of happiness. Someone who's not happy is much better off than someone who is not sad. In other words, when a person uses a word, even if it's negated, that's important. The second thing we found that was interesting were these cognitive words. And it wasn't that cognitive words themselves predicted health improvement. It was change in cognitive words. Now remember, these cognitive words are words like because, cause, and effect, and understand, realize. The people who benefited the most went from using a fairly low rate of these cognitive words to a high rate, suggesting a couple of things. First of all, they were constructing a story. They were thinking in a more complex way over time. And another thing that we started to appreciate was they were changing their story. And this had bugged me because at the time I had been doing all this work on writing, it had gotten in the media quite a bit. And my wife and I would go to parties, and people would come up to me and start telling me about their traumas. I had become a trauma magnet. And I should tell you, I have absolutely no background in anything I'm talking about tonight. I have no background in linguistics. I have no background in clinical psychology. Nevertheless, I was kind of playing that interesting role, and these were great stories, and almost everybody who came and told me a horrible story also had really bad health. And at the back of my mind, I would justify it, thinking, well, this will be good for them. And then I'd see the same people at the next party 6 months later, a year later, and they would tell me the exact same story, and they had the same health problems. And the data that we had analyzed just made everything clear. They were telling the same story. They weren't changing. Change was necessary.